Living a life in full is a conversation you always wanted to have with that person who gave an amazing TED Talk, or the author of one of your favorite books, or that inspirational Olympian you always wanted to know more about. It's graduate-level conversations with those making a difference in the world and in the lives of others. This show brings you new ideas and approaches so that you can live a life in full. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Stout, and I hope you enjoy this episode. This episode of Living a Life in Full is brought to you by ATI Physical Therapy. If you need physical therapy, choose ATI. ATI offers exceptional care, trusted expertise, and remarkable outcomes, customized to your needs. ATI has over 800 clinics coast to coast in 25 states. Want to start feeling better fast? ATI can help address chronic pain or recovery from an injury or surgery expertly, quickly, and conveniently. ATI's FIRST program uses a performance-based methodology to safely return injured workers to their workplace. FIRST is designed to increase strength, endurance, and cardiovascular functioning. ATI's sports medicine provides athletic training services to help athletes get back in the game. ATI has hundreds of professional, collegiate, high school, middle school, and club relationships nationwide. ATI also offers a variety of specialty services, including home health, hand therapy, and women's health. To learn more about ATI's advances in evidence-based practice, clinical outcomes, and their innovative new smartphone app, please visit atipt.com. Welcome to another episode of Living a Life in Full. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Stout. And I have to say it's really an honor today to have Captain Jerry Linenger on this episode. Jerry is one of the most down-to-earth astronauts you could ever hope to meet, pun intended. Jerry was part of one of the most dangerous and dramatic missions in space history. While living aboard the Russian space station Mir, Jerry and his two Russian crew members faced numerous difficulties. They had the most severe fire ever aboard an orbiting spacecraft. They had failures of onboard systems. They had a near collision with a resupply cargo ship during a manual docking system test. They had loss of station electrical power, and they had loss of altitude control, resulting in a slow, uncontrolled tumble through space, which just kind of sends chills down my spine and sounds like a lot of different kinds of science fiction movies that I've seen, but these are actually things that Jerry has problem solved through. And in spite of all these challenges and added demands on their time on that mission, they still accomplished all of their mission goals, which included a spacewalk, a fly around, and all of the planned U.S. science experiments. In completing this 5-month mission, Jerry logged approximately 50 million miles, the equivalent of over 110 round trips to the moon and back. They had more than 2,000 orbits around the Earth and traveled at an average speed of 18,000 miles an hour. Jerry's been awarded numerous commendations and medals. He was a top graduate from the Naval Flight Surgeon Training and Naval Safety Officers Schools. He was awarded a gold medal from the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, and he's also a recipient of NASA's highest honor, the Distinguished Service Medal. He's authored 2 books, most recently completed an episode on National Geographic's new One Strange Rock, which we're going to go deep dive into, which is a new series that's hosted by Will Smith and produced by acclaimed filmmaker Darren Aronofsky and award-winning producer Jane Root. He's also the proud father of 4, and perhaps one of his greatest honors is to have been immortalized at his hometown McDonald's, which again we're going to get into. So welcome to the show, Jerry.
Thank you, Chris. Wonderful. I forgot about my life. It's kind of fun to hear it all spilled out now.
Yeah, you kind of needed to get that reminder, I'm sure. So, hey, I know it was some years back, in my memory, the longer back it is, the worse my memory is, but I think it was at a Renaissance weekend that we met, and I'm thinking it was maybe like one of the New Year's ones in Charleston, or do you remember? Does that ring any bells?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay.
Yes, I actually went down with my family to one down in Charleston, and I've participated in a number of other ones. You know, I kind of pick it depending on where my children are at the time. So I've got two
Ah,
boys out in the LA area, so I've been going to the Santa Monica
ah.
Renaissance weekends, and then you tie in a visit to my sons.
Well, that's perfect. That's a clever way to do it. I'm going to have Phil and Linda. They're going to be on an upcoming episode, so everyone stay tuned for that. That'll be fun. So
Wonderful.
yeah,
Greetings to them.
yeah, very small world. So, Jerry, man, we
You know,
have.
I got a quick one with Phil a little story about him. He runs the Renaissance weekends. Wonderful. He used to be a diplomat. You'll hear all about Phil, but we were outside in at Charleston, and my son. We're public school people. We're up here in a little town in northern Michigan, and my son was a bit overwhelmed. There were a lot of New York City people there, and they're all in private schools, and they're talking about going to Harvard and things like that, what their dreams were.
Uh-huh.
And my son got a little shy about the whole thing, and felt he's kind of like, Dad, I don't know, man. These people are like, kind of scary smart, and they're all from New York, and la la la. Well, I talked to Phil, and I introduced my son to him, and I told him that little story, and he said, John, us public school kids have to stick together, and he gives him a pat on the back. And
Oh,
I thought it was a wonderful moment.
yeah.
What a wise thing to say to my boy, to tell him, doesn't matter where you're coming from,
Yeah.
you can achieve anything as much as any other kid.
Oh, here. Yeah, I think that really speaks to kind of the ethos of the Renaissance weekend, and Phil and Linda both, and to you too, sir. I mean, you certainly came from humble beginnings and have just done some amazing things, and I'm anxious to have our audience hear about. So, there's so many things I want to talk about with you and your life and your experiences. I mean, just by any facet, it's really kind of amazing. And I kind of want to start from the beginning, actually, with your origin story. I have this habit. I love to deconstruct guests' CVs, and yours is one of the incredible ones. I know it starts back at the U.S. Naval Academy and then leads to medical school, 2 master's degrees, and to top it off, a PhD. Can you kind of pick us up, like from undergrad at the U.S. Naval Academy, and bring us forward?
Yeah, we had 5 kids in our family, Chris, and when my dad saw that the Naval Academy did not have tuition fees, and that become an officer in the Navy, that was sort of, hey son, that's where you need to go.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't afford to put us all through college. Dad drove a telephone truck, and good hard-working man, but that's tough to put 5 kids through college
Oh,
in that
man.
circumstance.
Sure. My
So
dad.
that kind of determined my fate, I guess. And I went there, and I will give the U.S. Naval Academy absolute full credit, if you want to call it a turnaround in my life, because they teach you that self-discipline and that sense of curiosity, and that's what's pretty much driven me the rest of my life. And I credit that as my turning point in life.
Wow.
Medical school, piece of cake after that. PhD stuff, University of North Carolina, pretty much piece of cake.
Easy peasy.
The master's degrees out in Southern Cal, and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, kind of a piece of cake. All downhill after you have that intense 4-year experience, training to be an officer and learning leadership skills
Wow.
at the United States Naval Academy, Annapolis. So hats off to them.
Here. So, did you also serve in your background as a flight surgeon? Is that right?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
So after I went directly to medical school, kind of a different program at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and finished that, and then went out to San Diego, did some surgical internship, and then I got into the aerospace medicine aspect of things. So down to
Okay.
Pensacola, Florida, Navy Flight School, kind of a modified program, but given my background at the academy, they took me a bit further than they would a normal flight surgeon. So I've got a lot of flight hours under my belt,
Wow.
and served with squadrons around the world. A couple years over in the Philippines, for example, with a squadron that used to fly out and hit the aircraft carriers as they came
Wow.
through the Middle East on their way to the Indian Ocean. And actually, we had some detachments out in the Indian Ocean, so I'd fly up to the Arabian Gulf and all over the world,
Wow.
hitting our U.S. Navy aircraft carriers.
Gosh, I had done some work with flying doctors over the years, and on a couple of the missions, I had opportunity to work with some flight surgeons. And I think I have such respect for flight surgeons, Jerry, and you obviously as well. Because like you guys are sort of like the Chuck Norrises of surgeons. It's just really a different breed. I mean, just really
what you're
amazing.
really after, when you think of, for example, a pro football player and all the money they put into that person. Same thing with with someone flying, F-18 or the F-35 Lightning coming up. These are $100 million aircraft,
Mm-hmm.
and you want that pilot to be 100% healthy, and you want him 100% psychologically stable, and you want no distractions in his life. And so the Navy very wisely integrates a well-trained physician into that squadron. You become sort of a sports medicine doctor. You become a ear, nose, throat doctor for sure, because pulling a lot of G's and going high altitude, and you end up with the ear blocks, things of that nature.
Uh-huh.
And so they integrate you. You get their respect because my own case, a lot of flying experience myself. You're flying with them, you're operating with them, you're deploying with them. They trust you, and they share any issue they have with you. And your main job, therefore, is to keep them healthy, keep them flying safe, and making sure we bring our aircraft back and we accomplish our mission. So
Wow.
it's a pretty nice program, and a smart spending of resources to have that flight surgeon integrated to Navy squadrons.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant, brilliant model. So I always do some embarrassing self-disclosures in these. In my fanciful youth, I contacted NASA and got their admissions packet and, for astronaut training, and completed it, sent it in, and of course I didn't make it too far. Can you lead us through how a person actually makes that transition to becoming a bona fide and highly decorated astronaut?
Yeah, there's a lot of people want to do it. You're not alone. Trust me, Chris. I think the last time there were like 30,000 applicants.
Thank you. That makes me feel better.
Yeah, maybe 10 spots.
I was really
you get
close. I
into-
could tell I was really close.
Yeah. You got to be persistent for one thing. I think what they do on the first record, I've heard this whispered, I'm not sure it's officially true, but the first time you apply, they put your name in the computer and they say, okay, and then they toss your application out and don't even read it because they have so many. And then if you persist the second time, they say, okay, this guy's not just doing this on a whim. He or she is truly interested in being an astronaut. Now we'll take a harder look at it.
Oh, that's good to know.
And so you messed up by only doing it once, probably. Number one. Number two, when you finally do make it, and I applied a few times, and after a while, you just went through my bag. I got an MD, I got a PhD, I got a couple of masters. I'm flying in the Navy. I'm getting,
what more do you need?
Well, I'm doing as good as I can, and they reject me. So it's kind of like, okay, I don't know what they're looking for, but I'm doing the best I can. And thank goodness for word processing, because it had just come around at that point, and I had all my application, because as you remember, it's a pretty extensive application.
Oh, yeah, right.
But I had it there, so I just updated it. Said I don't think I'm going to make it because I didn't make it last time, and but I pushed the button and printed it out, and that time I ended up making it. Now, having said that, so I guess the key ingredients are: you better have a pretty solid resume. You better have immersed your life in some, dangerous situations, scuba diving, flying jets, things like that, showing that you can perform under pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And but the final thing, you better be lucky. And people say, "Oh yeah, Jerry, you're not lucky. You have a great resume and you worked hard your whole life." I did, but I'll tell you, Chris, and I am 100% sincere in this. For that seat that I got, I guarantee there are 15 other people at least that were absolutely equally qualified to take that spot that I got. And so at the end, there's a bit of a dice roll. To get to that position where they're rolling the dice on you, it takes everything that you think: the self-discipline, the hard work, accomplishing things, solid education. You better be healthy because they will probe you. You'll find things wrong with you didn't even know you had.
Wow.
Because they're going to invest a lot in you.
Yeah.
So they want to make sure you have the health that'll take you through a career. But then at the bottom line, you get yourself in that position. And then it's just pure privilege. And I realized from the very start that it was a privilege representing mankind as an astronaut, and you try, therefore, to represent them well.
Yeah, well, I think you've done that. So you've been to space twice, and I know not all astronauts do that. What was your first mission like?
So it's a bit of a, the first one's overwhelming, I guess. We went up, and the main thing we did, we had a untethered spacewalk. I was the inside guy helping coordinate the ballet out there.
Oh,
Guys firing thrusters, kind of like a Buck Rogers jetpack thing. It was
wow.
an awesome advancement in our spacewalking abilities, ability to get you back to the space station if you get detached.
Mm.
And then the other big thing, we had a satellite. We actually set it out into space, left it alone. It did observations, and then at the end of the mission, we went, grabbed it, put it back in the payload bay,
Wow.
and brought it back to Earth. And the final thing was a big laser we beamed at the Earth. And when you think of weather systems, we only see half of it. You see the lighted side of the Earth. You see the satellite photos of these,
Oh.
typhoons swirling.
Uh-huh.
We had a laser, and on the dark side of the Earth, we would ping it at the Earth and map out cloud cover, everything else. And now you have the complete picture of planet Earth's, um, atmosphere and
Wow.
disturbances and weather patterns. And that was a test of that device. It worked. They then built a satellite, and it's now up there pinging down at the Earth, trying to get a complete weather picture so that we can predict those hurricanes and other destructive things and get people out of the way. So it
That's
saves lives. So
that is
all those
amazing.
missions, you just feel like, hey, I'm doing something that's valuable,
Hmm.
and it's going to make a difference in our quality of life here on the planet.
Right. Yeah, I think through this conversation, people are going to learn a lot more about that because I think that's oftentimes an unrealized, unrecognized kind of benefit that everybody needs to kind of do a tip of the hat of appreciation to NASA and the work that you guys have done because it's long lasting and it's impactful. So. Second mission, I know, was quite a test. Sort of talked about that in the intro. Tell us about how training was different for that, and step us through what happened on that 5-month mission.
Yeah, what happened was we wanted to engage with the Russians. We wanted to pick up some of their long duration space experience that they had. They had a space station called Mir, and so we took some Americans and basically turned them into cosmonauts. So after that first mission, I ended up in Star City, Russia. Every morning, one-on-one with a Russian language teacher,
Wow! Oh
learning
my
that language.
gosh! Oh
Yeah, and every
God!
afternoon, a rocket scientist, talking in Russian.
Oh
And
my gosh!
so it was 2 years of a lot of hard work to prepare for a very complex mission on a very, I didn't know it at the time, but a very unstable, old, failing space station.
Mm.
The only thing the Russians had at that time, and so they were going to keep that thing going no matter what. Design life 3 to 5 years, and it was 13, 14 years old.
Oh
So
gosh! Oh jeez! Oh, so in that 5-month period, at the time, that was the longest duration flight for an American male at the time, right? That was one of your accomplishments. Is that right?
that's correct. And it was a tough 5 months, I'll tell you. That was the
Gosh.
toughest 5 months of my life for sure. And I was already, to be honest, kind of, burned out from 2 years in Russia trying to learn that language and learn all those complicated engineering diagrams and everything else so that I could get up there. And I kind of thought, thank goodness I'm blasting off. I can go up there and relax now and then, look out the window and see the planet. But
Yeah.
instead, it was it
Oh.
was 24 hours a day trying to stay alive, trying to
Oh.
keep the space station going, trying to get the work done.
Gosh.
Um, it was a tough 5 months of my life.
Well, tell us about the fire. I mean, every one of the things I said in the intro would just terrify me, when I was doing the research, in the background for this, Jerry. I mean, it's like, oh my God, I can't imagine a fire in a space station. I can't imagine, kind of almost falling out of orbit. I can't imagine, almost, getting, dinged by, a ship coming in for, docking. And so step us through what happened, what was the process of these things and how did you
Yeah,
guys
well,
survive?
the fire, we had a backup generator for the oxygen. The primary generator had broken. Ignited this thing, supposed to percolate a little oxygen, but it had built-in fuel and it had a lot of oxygen.
Oh,
And it was like a blowtorch. The thing sparked, did something it wasn't supposed to do, obviously. It's supposed to be a little exothermic reaction. Instead, this thing's on fire 2 or 3 feet length,
oh,
sparks flying off the end of it. And I'll tell you, Chris, the biggest surprise was the spread and the density of that smoke. You know, I've done Navy firefighting. I'm used to, you know, closed spaces where, you know, you have a fire and you battle it, controlled situation. But on that space station, I'll tell you, within 30 seconds, it was just total blackout. Couldn't see the 5 fingers in front of your face.
Oh.
You know, smoke everywhere. There's no, you know, going down low in a fire, because that's smoke in space, and
it's
you know,
everywhere.
zero G, if you will. It is
Yeah.
everywhere.
So is it just like little particulates that are just all like, how do you like clear it or something? How do you get rid of all that?
Yeah, that's a good point. So you fight the fire. You know, getting that out took about 14 minutes. 4 fire extinguishers.
Oh
You know,
my
I mean,
God.
it was a battle to get that thing out. And there's nowhere to go. Obviously,
Right.
you're in a space station. You're kind of stuck with your fate.
Oh,
But you're exactly right. When it was out, you have that sigh of relief, and then I guess my flight surgeon kicks into me, my doctoring, and I say, you know, we're still in big trouble.
yeah.
We have an unbreathable atmosphere, and the only thing keeping us alive at that point, we had some respirators on with a little oxygen bottle next to it.
Wow.
You know, it was an unbreathable atmosphere, and so now you hope your life support systems can clear that smoke, toxic material,
Wow.
debris out of the air as it's floating everywhere, before your oxygen runs out.
Gosh. Did it leave like a residue on instruments and equipment once you cleared it?
Yeah, you know, here's a secret, and you know, no one's listening, right, Chris? It's just between
Yeah,
you
just
and
you and I. Yep, yep. This is all top secret.
The real secret is, you know, that the Russians, you know, to this day would say, what a great life support system we have. Those fans and filters just clean the heck out of even a bad fire. The reality was the hull on the dark side of the Earth would get very cold. The fire extinguisher was water-based, and so there was some water mist and droplets, if you will, you know, mixed in with all the smoke.
Uh-huh.
And when you move to the dark side of the Earth, that water condensed on the cold hull, and we had kind of free water. And we had that problem even before the fire. You know, you should not have free water when you have
Right.
electronics and
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah.
But you know, they had a hard time getting rid of that, and the life support systems couldn't keep up with it. But the bottom line in that case, it paid off, because that kind of cleared that atmosphere by condensing those water
Wow.
droplets onto the hull. And then later on, we took old discarded, you know, T-shirts, whatever we could find, and we'd sop up the water and stuff it
Wow.
into sort of these garbage bags that end up on the, you know, the resupply ship eventually and burn
Unbelievable.
up in the atmosphere.
So I'm surprised to hear that you'd have like a water-based fire extinguisher. I think you'd have like halon or something like that. So that's
Yeah, it sounds good, but when you really start thinking about it, you know, I'm in space for 5 months. It's a closed ecosystem. Fire took place about a month into it.
Oh,
And
God.
if we're spraying any chemical in the air, you know, I'm
It's
breathing that
it's
for the next
for the
5
next
months.
golly.
Yeah, so you
Oh,
know, water base is the best you could actually do up there, because you know, you don't want to contaminate the atmosphere.
I'll
There's
be
3
darned.
things, Chris, that's I think interesting, that we trained kind of automatic. You better be able to respond without really thinking, sort of
Mm-hmm.
like a wide receiver in football needs to know the pattern he's running, and
Mm-hmm.
has to do it without thinking. You know, and that's fire.
Mm-hmm.
You better react quickly, and you better react correctly. Rapid decompression's the other one.
Uh-huh.
Now that blowtorch was going with, you know, a lot of power behind it. It was like a blowtorch, and so the whole time you're kind of looking down at that hull, hoping that the
It's
torch doesn't point down, because then I've got rapid decompression. If you pierce that hull,
on top.
you know,
Oh,
quick suffocation. So that one's on your mind. So that's the 2, and the third one is a toxic event, a toxic spill in the atmosphere, and we definitely had that with all the byproducts of that fire. So we had the big 3 all at once, simultaneously, on a space station, isolated, cut
oh,
off, no communication to the Earth. And it was up to the ingenuity of myself and my cosmonaut crewmates to,
wow.
you know, to perform under pressure and and keep your cool.
Did you learn how
Get
to?
that fire out.
Did you learn?
That's what I was screaming. We're gonna get that fire out,
Gosh.
and I'm gonna see my boy again. Had a newborn at home, so.
Oh, well, did you learn how to say "we're out of Schlitz" in Russian? So-
There were a lot of expressions in Russian that I used. And,
I
that is
bet.
interesting, though. I mean, the whole time it was a Russian space station, and if you were God looking down at us, you would not know who the American was. And we, used the skill sets that each of us brought up there. And we were basically cosmonauts, and we spoke only in Russian for the 5 months.
No
We only
kidding.
spoke to Mission Control Moscow for those 5 months, only in Russian. And so, again,
Wow.
it was, I kind of, in my title now, I say, U.S. astronaut / mere cosmonaut.
No kidding.
And I think that
Wow.
kind of reflects what I was doing.
Yeah.
Now, on the International Space Station now, you're an astronaut. The cosmonauts have their own segment,
Uh-huh.
and you train together, but not to the extent. I was basically integrated as a Russian cosmonaut. No special, accommodations because I'm an American and speak English.
I'll
It
be
was
darned.
a Russian operation, and our goal was to kind of learn how the Russians operate, and so that was probably a smart way to do it.
Yeah, I guess. Gosh. So, speaking of your son, that this whole first experience, or whole mission experience, that led to your first book, the Off the Planet: Surviving 5 Perilous Months Aboard the Space Station Mir. Is that right?
That's correct. It was kind of a reflective thing. So when I
Mhm.
got back, actually I saw Jim Lovell, the old Apollo
Oh,
13 guy, and
yeah.
he's living in Chicago. Great man. And I went to see him, and I said, I'm moving to a small town, northern Michigan. Any advice for me, Jim? And he said, well, you had 5 months of what I had a couple days of on Apollo 13, and you ought to share that story, and you ought to go speak about it, share it. You owe that to the world. You had the privilege to go up there, and you should write about it. So he had his book, obviously, Apollo 13 book,
Mm-hmm.
Lost Moon originally. So anyway, I said, well, I guess I can do that. I'm in a small town, didn't have a job lined up, and so I took a year or so to kind of reflect on things, and it was, to be honest with you, it was cathartic.
I bet,
there was a
sure.
lot of suppressed pressure and psychological pressure, and you just had to keep performing, and so you just
Yeah.
pushed that down and kept it out so you could perform.
Yeah.
And writing that book was a way to let it all out and kind of catch up psychologically and
That's great.
with what had happened. And then you've got your physiological catching up to do after floating for 5 months, so I had to do a lot of physical rehab and everything else. So I would say, that book was cathartic, along with, I'd write until it hurt, actually. And sometimes I'd find myself, psychologically drained and say, man, I got to take a break. And I'd go out and
Yeah.
take a walk, which was part of my rehab. So
Yeah,
it was
that's-
kind of a recovery
good.
period for about a year and a half after that flight.
Psychically and physically. I know that I've seen some of your other interviews online, and you talked about the capacity of compartmentalizing, and that was one of the things that really, it sounded like, if I interpreted what you're saying correctly, that was one of the ways that, kind of helped get you through that time. So I could see you'd need to have a
Yeah.
kind of a debriefing, decompression kind of time, so to speak,
Yes,
afterwards.
acutely that compartmentalization is important because you have fear. It's survival instinct. You
Mhm.
know this is going to kill me, but you've got to tuck that away, and you just got to get methodical. And thank goodness my 2 crewmates, they were one was a military engineer, one used to fly a MiG. They've been in those tight situations before, and we all kept our cool and compartmentalize it, tuck that fear away, and get on with the task of saving that spacecraft station and saving our lives.
Yeah.
And on a broader scale, you're exactly right. I guess you kind of are able to compartmentalize the psychological isolation, your loneliness, missing your
Right.
family,
Sure.
not sure you're going to make it back, all that pressure to perform, which is a huge one also. I've got 120 experiments that I've got people down on Earth that spent their lifetime, designing those experiments, and I had the privilege to execute it up there. And in spite of those circumstances, I said, I am going to come back, look them in the eyes, and I'm going to, say I got their job done. And
Wow.
accomplish
You did it.
those goals of the mission.
Gosh.
So those are pressures that build up, and trying to perform hour after hour, really by the minute up there. It takes some recovery afterwards.
Yeah, I remember too hearing, and I'd like you to speak about this. You're, sort of like walking off the shuttle. That typically that's not the process. That people typically get kind of gurneyed off or something. Tell us about your reentry, so to speak, back to Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah, after 5 months, you're floating, and it's worse than me saying, "Chris, go lay in a bed for the next 5 months,"
Mm-hmm.
because at least you have gravity, and when you roll over, you're fighting gravity. Up there, it is effortless, and so you end up with bone loss and muscle atrophy. I had about 65% of my pre-flight strength level, lost about 14% of my bone mass, hips, lower spine, disuse atrophy. So when you land, you turn your head, you feel like you're tumbling, and your ear is not,
Oh,
adjusted to gravity.
gosh.
But when they came in to carry me off on a stretcher, I said, I've been in space for 5 months, and I've overcome a lot of tough times, a lot of difficulties up there. I'm an officer, United States Navy, and we don't get carried off on stretchers.
I love that. Oh man.
I'm going to
Uh,
walk off this thing. I'm going to crawl off this thing. To be honest, Chris, I don't, they could have, if I passed out and they dragged me out, that would have been just fine, because if I had the ability to finish that thing, I was
yeah,
going to finish it.
that
I
is.
wasn't going to give up at the end. That was a tough mission. And I
Yeah.
also didn't want my wife and family seeing me carried off on a stretcher. So I said, I'm going to walk off this thing no matter what. I don't care what happens to me.
That is so awesome, Jerry, man. So, speaking of which, was it like spending that time? You also, your second book, I think you had written like around 72 letters, and did those then get compiled into the Letters to My Son book? Is that?
Yeah, the first book was a, memoir, if you will. I tried to get right to space as fast as I could.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I was in space, not sure I was going to make it back. And I would say acutely, probably 3 times, the fire, we had a near collision, life support systems failing, one thing after another. And then, just kind of the overall risk of launch and reentry and
Right.
doing spacewalks and everything else. You kind of get this feeling that, I might not make it back. And
Mm-hmm.
so my son was about 1.5 years old, and I said, I'm going to write him some notes. We weren't able to get that down to earth very easily. It was, I attach it to the end of data files every week or so over a ground pass over Moscow, downlink it. They'd peel it off, give it to my wife. She
Oh,
collected them.
wow.
And when I got back and, started reading those letters, I said, every father should be saying this to their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing, I'm unique in where I was saying it from and my lifestyle at that point, floating in space. But the basic human connection and, the relationships we have for our offspring, the people we care about more than anything in the world, is the same. And every father should be saying this to their kid. So I said, I can share these letters, put a little framework around it, but they are literally letters that I wrote floating on the ceiling up in space.
Gosh.
Very personal letters to my
Wow.
son, what I hope for him in his life,
Oh,
telling him why I'm sacrificing what I'm sacrificing up there. And if I didn't make it back, letting him know that I thought it was a privilege to be up there
that
and to
is
represent mankind well. So I hope he understood.
that is so touching, Jerry. Again, I think it really speaks to the humanitarian part of who you are and what makes up, you as a person. I know, speaking of this, you're quite family oriented. You've got 4 kids. How did you and your wife, Catherine, meet?
Yeah, kind of an overlap. Everything's kind of fortuitous in life. You just have to, you know, you have these moments and you don't know that they're significant or whether they're going to be significant and end up, changing your whole course of your life.
Uh-huh.
They do what's called a hail and farewell. So I was going to a research center. I was being hailed. I was just arriving at a Naval Health Research Center out in San Diego,
Uh-huh.
going to do some research on bone remodeling. My wife was finishing up a master's at San Diego State, and so she was being farewelled because she had finished her internship. and there was a little party on the beach, and we overlapped by a day, met each other,
Wow.
and then off to the races. So again, it's a matter of a 1 day, overlap, and or the whole course of your life can change.
How cool.
It's
Wow.
that way with all of us, right?
Yeah.
Everything that happens in your life is kind of just a bit of a whim,
Yeah.
and just the way things work out.
Yeah. Other.
Fate, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I want to get into the new National Geographic One Strange Rock series, but before we do that, clarify for me. I think you were in an episode of something called Secret Space Escapes. Can you start with that show and tell us about that and that episode?
Yeah, I've been in quite a few documentaries over the years, mostly talking, with some graphics and some reenactments of the fire, and then some real film from space. So a lot of those, in that case, are talking about some really close calls in space that sometimes, you don't even really hear about.
Mm-hmm.
And, for example, in my case, the Russians did not want to publicize that they had a failing space station. And it was a
Sure.
lot of public relations things between the U.S. government and Russia. And when I came back, it was kind of between a rock and a hard place,
Mm-hmm.
because on one hand, you have to be straightforward about what happened so that we don't repeat those mistakes, and
Right.
so that we improve the safety for the next people going up there. But on the other hand, there's sort of a diplomacy going here, and you don't want to break up and undermine things at high diplomatic levels, I guess. So
Right.
um, anyway, those are the types of things in some documentaries I've talked about. The latest one, though, is much more focused on planet Earth. How life emerged, how lucky we are to be living on the planet, and it's done kind of at a higher level than anything I'd done in the past.
Gotcha.
National Geographic, as a kid,
Oh
you read
yeah.
the old magazine because
The
it was
yeah the
incredible
place.
photography.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let
So,
me
yeah,
do a lead in.
cinematography is amazing in the series, and I narrate one. They have 8 different astronauts narrating, and then they have Will Smith kind of being the common thread overall narration of it, and then we all kind of appear in it, reflecting on our experience in space and our observation of planet Earth from a different perspective
Yeah,
than anyone else would have.
I've seen some clips and trailers and things on it too, and from what I learned, I want to give you kind of a plug for it too, and really encourage listeners to watch it. It's 8 storytelling astronauts that have been featured on this, and as you said, and as in the intro, Will Smith is kind of the overall overarching host of it. And I want to read a quote. This has been called an epic cinematic event series that will redefine natural history filmmaking and promises to be a mind-bending, thrilling journey that explores the fragility and wonder of planet Earth. It's the extraordinary story of why life as we know it exists on Earth, brought into perspective by the only people that have left it behind, astronauts. And in one of the things that I saw, Jerry, so clarify for me, was your episode originally called Death?
It was death. And I said, how do I get the short end of the straw on that one?
Hey, what's up? Death.
They modified it to survival,
Okay.
the latest iteration. But, there is sort of, one part, for example, it's already been airing a bit. And so my series actually just aired this week, and I was very pleased, because you never know, how it's all going to get edited
Sure, right.
and turn out.
Yeah.
But one thing, they're looking at in Kamchatka Peninsula there in Russian Siberia, they look at salmon. And all the salmon migrate, they lay the eggs and they die.
Mm-hmm.
But then the salmon are very high in nitrogen, and the nitrogen then they get decomposed, and they have these incredible films of thousands of maggots eating these salmon. It's just kind of gross you out. You don't want to watch it over dinner. But then that nitrogen gets into the soil, and then the trees along that river suck up the nitrogen, and they flourish because nitrogen is fertilizer for the trees.
Mm-hmm.
And then within the trees, the insects find nesting spots, and then the insects are on the water, and the salmon eat the insects, and then the salmon die. They create the nitrogen that goes up the tree. It's just
Wow.
with this one little ecosystem where everything is interwoven, interdependent, and it's awesome and it's amazing. So it's those type of things that you just don't really put it all together. And I think from an astronaut in space, I look down at the planet and I say, wow, what a system that is. What a fabric. Uh, awesome how that all interacts and how it all works.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think when people think of astronauts, they default to thinking of space travel or thinking of this or that, obviously, which is part of being an astronaut. But I think it's a really clever lens in which to look at the enormity and the microscopity or the microscopicness sort of what has to work and what has to work right, in order for things to thrive and people to live.
Yeah,
So,
we talk about other life out there in the universe, and you look at the probability theory and you say, okay, we're finding these exoplanets and everything else. But I'll tell you, if you really look at what it took to create life on Earth, for it to occur, and that's just our feeble mind, trying to piece God's,
understand it, yeah.
plan, and trying to make sense of it. But when we do that, God gave us the ability to think. So I think it's good that we do try to piece it together. And he's probably up there laughing at us, thinking, well, you don't have that quite right. But when you look at all the different things that had to happen, if you just, turn on that rational side, if you will, it's just all these chance things that had to happen for life to exist on this planet. It gets to the point where I'm not so sure there is any other life out there.
Yeah. Yeah, that everything really has to kind of line itself up to be able to have that happen. So
in space and in time, and that's the thing we don't think about, the time factor. And you're talking a billion years or 14 billion years or 4 billion years. We're, as humans, we've got what, 10 fingers, 10 toes. We're good with those kind of numbers. We can go up to 100 or 1,000 and have sort of a feel for what that means. But a billion is really beyond our comprehension. We don't really get it. These vast amounts of time and the vast amount of space and distance between planets and between different galaxies, it is mind-boggling, and we cannot truly comprehend the immensity of it.
yeah, I think that's very true. So, well, I will put the books and these episodes and things in the show notes for everybody to check out, and I really encourage it. And I'm looking
it's going to
forward
be around a long time, Chris. I
Yeah.
don't even care about a plug for it. It's a well-done series. And I'll tell you that the fun thing about it, you can just sit in your rocking chair and your lounge chair and put your feet up and just kind of take it in and let the facts kind of go in one ear and out the other, and you would just appreciate the gestalt of it, the beauty of the planet, the complexity of the planet.
Yeah.
And then you can rewatch it and you can pick up all kinds of facts that are, fascinating, like the nitrogen going up the trees.
Yeah.
So it's got all those aspects. I guarantee this show will people be watching it 20 years from now. So no hurry to jump on it, but it is a well done series called One Strange Rock. And if you want to, see my own, episode where I'm kind of highlighted, and that's the one survival episode number 5.
Awesome. Good. We'll do that. Yeah, I've heard that the visuals and stuff, again, kind of true to the National Geographic reputation of, just beautiful photography, cinematography, et cetera, is one of the, additional key things about this in addition to the stories.
And the other thing on a personal level, I'll tell you, Chris, it's fun going up new learning curves. And so this, doing film and doing the different things I've been involved in, it's been wonderful, and I learn a lot about how they put these things together, and I've seen it, over a decade now, but this one's kind of the ultimate one.
Yeah.
How it's all put together, how the publicity works. We have New York, showings at the Lincoln Center with a couple thousand people watching the premiere.
Wow.
We're out in LA with the television critics and learning how that world works, and so it's been interesting process in addition to the actual filming. And
yeah. How fun. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit because I can't talk to an astronaut without talking about kind of what's going on in space now. I mean, I think it's almost, in some levels, almost like a resurgence. I was out at South by a couple of years ago and went through just this amazing exhibit that, NASA, had put together. And it was really, kind of cool. There was some sort of, gray-haired, cool scientists and engineers, and there were some young folks with, tattoos, and everybody was just all kind of communicating reading and, talking about the tech and talking about, the possibilities and the future and stuff, I think, now we see a lot of stuff with, travel to Mars, and we see about privatization of space travel and, all sorts of new missions. I just read in yesterday's Wall Street Journal an article with the new director of NASA talking about, lunar explorations again and things like that. So what's your take on things? Where do you see things today? Are you happy with it? What are your hopes for tomorrow with NASA, with the United States involvement in space travel?
Yeah, let me start with what you just said there. The gray-haired people and the young people with their tattoos. I always thought that's the beauty of NASA. You've got the mentors there that have been around, kind of the old timers. They've seen, failures along the way. They've seen what works. They have a bit of caution, and then you mix that with the young people because, space is sexy.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And so you can recruit the brain power of the world, and that's what's down there at the Johnson Space Center. I'll tell you, you've got some sharp people down there, and you've got that beautiful mix. And as far as government programs go, there is none better than that, because what happens is you get these young people coming down there, postgraduates or, out of college even. Mm-hmm. And it's probably the best postgraduate education you can have, because you've got brain power from the world, all concentrated, given a task, given a certain amount of time to accomplish that task, given great mentors above them and the equipment that they need. And most of those people last for 4 or 5 years, and then they go out and they start their own businesses. Mm-hmm. And they create jobs and they create economic opportunity for others. NASA bemoans that. They say, man, we got this great talent, and how can we hang on to those people? I'd give the counter argument. You're doing what a government program should do. You are developing people to go out and to lead and to create business and to create jobs. Mm-hmm. It's a fantastic way to spend money, if you will, taxpayer money. Yeah. You can't get a better program than that.
Yeah, that's true. It probably reminds you of your medical training of see one, do one, teach one. It sort of becomes this
mentorship.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I've seen guys, virtual reality training was kind of starting when I was there. Now we have, more virtual reality out there. But at that time, when I'm doing spacewalk training, I'd put on this big clunky headgear, mm-hmm. and it was like I'm, my hands moving out, and I'm getting the virtual reality. First time I've ever seen anything like this. It was a group of, 7, 8 people there that were the virtual reality training spacewalkers, how to do spacewalks and what you would expect out there, avoid sharp edges, things like that. Well, those guys, again, they left NASA after about 5 years, went out to Silicon Valley area, LA. And last I heard, they had sort of $1 billion company going in virtual reality.
Wow.
And they had 200,000, or I'm exaggerating, 20,000 employees.
Yeah, that's
so
cool.
That's the kind of program you want to spend money on. And that is just the job creation part of it. Then you've got all the benefits, the technology, everything else.
Yeah.
So there's my little bit for why NASA should be around and why we should spend money on space exploration. Back to your question a little bit there, it's a lot tougher to do these things. It's not a video game. It's tremendous speeds. It is, enormous amounts of power and force to get into space. And so when you talk about going to Mars, that's a pretty big stretch. Mm-hmm. And I sort of like that idea of going back to the moon. It's 3 days away. If you have problems, you can get people back to Earth in a relatively short time. You want to go to Mars, you're talking 1.5 years, 2 year, 3 year trip. You have a problem along the way, and you've got big problems.
Yeah.
And so, setting up a lunar colony makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I think, and again, it brings me back to my childhood, in the 60s, and just the whole lunar space program and everything, Mercury and Apollo and Gemini, but with newer tech,
inspirational.
Yeah, exactly.
It's it affected me. Yeah. It affected you. It affected a lot of people. Whether you're an astronaut or not doesn't matter. it got you thinking of
Hmm.
bigger things and what we could accomplish.
Well,
And
and
so,
look at our
I like doing hard things, just like Kennedy said. We do it because it's hard.
yeah, yeah,
That's
and
what
it's
that's what we should be doing. Doesn't matter what we do so much. So I guess let me just say that it doesn't matter what we're doing. Mars, Moon, asteroid. I don't care.
yeah.
It's just got to be hard, and it's got to challenge us, and it's got to bring out the best in us, and it's got to, pull those old timers together with the smart young people with a common goal and to move mankind forward. That's what matters,
Yeah.
not where we're going.
Here, here. I think it's kind of cool in the vernacular today, even of people talking about. It doesn't necessarily have to do anything with space, but like calling it, your project is your moonshot project. It's become the thing that means, this is where it's inspirational, it's focused, it's high energy, it's high impact kind of thing. That's just become part of our vocabulary, which I
Yeah,
think
isn't
is
it?
so
50
fitting.
years later, we still say, hey, we went to the moon, didn't we? You can
Yeah,
still do that.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
It's that was a heck of a thing we did.
Yeah,
There's no doubt about it.
yeah.
But maybe a little bit of a problem with that is with space shuttle, for example. Although we did have two terrible accidents, you start thinking it's kind of routine, and it is not routine. And
Mm-hmm.
the private space companies, SpaceX blew up a couple
Mm-hmm.
rockets along the way, and they still have not gotten to a person-rated vehicle to take us to the International Space Station.
Yeah,
It's probably 6, 7 years late at this point.
yeah.
So it is hard. It's going to be hard. And we get excited, and I'm excited, don't get me wrong, about some of the things that SpaceX and Boeing and everyone else is doing. But it's a tough process. There's no magic. No one has some magic wand.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so these new space companies have learned the hard way, really.
Mm-hmm.
Having
Yeah.
said that, I think a lot of that is water under the bridge, and at this point, I'm pretty optimistic we're finally sort of caught up to where we probably should have been maybe 4 or 5 years ago. If we had followed a different template.
Gotcha. That's good. That's reassuring. So I want to bring us back down to Earth and probably somewhere a bit closer to where I'm guessing you're at geographically today. What's this McDonald's thing all about, Jerry?
Yeah, it's amazing you do your research. I give you credit. What's funny? I was just down in Detroit. An old, I'm a Detroit guy and went to medical school in Detroit. Thought I was going to do trauma surgery, and unfortunately, that was the place to do it at that time.
Yeah.
But I just did some filming down there, and I went to my old town and walked around. But my old town of East Detroit has a McDonald's, and they kind of decorated the whole thing with the space theme, and they've got a lot of the things that I brought back, kind of
Wow.
different things I had in space. And they
Uh,
built this big statue, and it's me, and it's probably 10 feet tall. And,
oh.
and when you're ordering, it's over the top of you, scary almost, right at the counter there. So that's
Wow.
my claim to fame. Jerry Linenger has a statue in a McDonald's in East Detroit,
There you
Michigan.
go. Well, hometown boy done good, right?
That's
So
it.
that's very cool. So, well, I also want to bring.
Hey, along those lines, it's funny. My nieces, I'll never forget. I'd been in space and spacewalking and doing all the things we've been talking about. Then I was on the Oprah show, and it was actually Richard Branson was on, and myself and Sebastian Younger, one of the authors, and we had different people on the show. But in any case, my niece, who was probably 10 at the time, comes home to my brother and says, "Oh my gosh, Uncle Jerry is on Oprah." And that was the biggest, most amazing thing that Uncle Jerry could have
That
done.
was
Going to space didn't
yeah,
matter.
big space
Any of the other
smash.
stuff. So the McDonald's thing is kind of in that same realm.
That's good. Everybody's got their criteria. You can win medals, Jerry. You can do all these other things, but you gotta get your time on Oprah or gotta get your McDonald's. So
There you go.
that's very cool. So, and I know I want to talk about in closing last few things. I suspect that maybe this is because of your experiences of looking down on Earth for 5 months, that you really have a strong humanitarian focus and a strong humanitarian ethos and thread through some of the work that you're involved with now. You're a founding board member of Global Freshwater, which is a think tank, on Global Freshwater, a think tank called Circle of Blue. And you're also a member of the advisory board at the sustainability leader Volans. So tell us about what got you involved with those and what you do and what those organizations are all about.
Well, as I'm talking now, I'm looking out of a bay that, Sutton's Bay, where I am here. It's a little bay off Grand Traverse Bay, which is off of Lake Michigan. And so, anybody that sees the Great Lakes has to fall in love with fresh water. I mean, This is the greatest collection of fresh water on Earth. And so, like everything starts locally, I guess. And I just was interested in, from space, you realize fresh water is everything.
Yeah.
That's what defines mankind, ancient civilizations, the Tigris Euphrates, the Nile, the Yangtze. The man needs water. And, maybe we need to take a little bit better care of it. And I'm sort of a middle ground guy, though. I really believe that 80% of us can find common ground around, keeping fresh water fresh and not polluting it and not bringing invasive species in. And there's an extreme on both ends that I think is not helpful. So, if you have someone that just wants to dump a bilge into the Great Lakes, they deserve prison or whatever you want. They deserve some punishment for that. But that's, like 1% out there, or not even that. And then on the other extreme, we have people that, if you swim in the water and you didn't take a shower in the Great Lakes before you went in the water, you're contaminating the Great Lakes. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So I'm a middle ground person. I think there's a lot of common ground on a lot of these issues. And I think the pendulum swings way too far one way and way too far the other way. And those people on the extremes kind of dominate the press, if you will. And unfortunately, makes it seem like there's some crisis and some conflict, and that we can't find common ground of a simple thing like, protecting our freshwater resources.
Yeah. Well,
so that's kind of my angle on all these things and why I'm involved. Having said that, I would say that, I'm involved in getting these things going. I believe in them. I'm still proud of what they're doing, but I'm not a day-to-day operator. But it's very hard, and I guess a cautionary tale for any organization. It's very hard not to get, swung in a direction you don't necessarily want to be toward one of those extremes, because those extremes are doing all the shouting and all the press coverage and having all the big international meetings.
Right.
And so, we need a lot more of that 80% in the middle organizations.
Yeah.
And in my Circle of Blue, for example, we talk about in Australia the drought, and maybe global warming is causing this drought. Well, the next year they have more rain than they can handle. The dams are overflowing. The rivers are, they got water they don't know what to do with. It's the coldest winter ever. They do no reporting on it.
Wow.
So I call my friend and say, come on, there's got to be a balance here. If you're going to talk about a drought, you got to talk about plentiful rain that they don't know what to do with. And so these crises is kind of what everyone tries to create, because that gets the attention and gets the press and brings in the funding dollars, I guess. But I'm a middle of the road. Use the Great Lakes for commerce. I love watching a big freighter go by. I love seeing the iron ore going down to make human lives better and easier and build cars and everything else. But don't dump your bilge in the lake.
Right.
Common sense.
Exactly.
Stuff. And I think 90% of us are on the same page.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I think bringing common sense into that just practical, actionable kinds of things can just go a long way. So I share your opinion.
Yes.
So in our final little bit of time, I want to let you go. This has just been great. I could, maybe we can do a round two, or I could talk to you, all day. But if someone's interested in space, and I know that can be a variety of different kinds of things. It can be the track of an astronaut like you. It can be engineers. It can be a variety of different kinds of specialty scientists, etc. What would you recommend? Where should someone start? What should they look at if they're in high school or college or looking towards a career? Where would you point someone?
Yeah, probably the documentaries I just talked about. Those are pretty darn good. Could take
Mm-hmm.
a look at that. There's plenty out there. Read some of the books. Apollo 13, Jim Lovell, as I mentioned, great book. Just kind of immerse yourself in it. Engineering in the STEM fields matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're interested in a career, even peripherally involved with space or aeronautics, anything else, you better have some background in engineering at least, and you better understand math, science, engineering, if you're going to have any hope to make a difference in those industries.
Sure.
But it's a fascinating world. It's, even myself, I mean, sometimes I say, okay, you read about something in the galaxy, and then you read about, something shooting stars or whatever, black holes. You can go forever. It's like, our knowledge is so limited. There's so
Right.
many of these discoveries that take your breath away.
Yeah.
So I guess to some degree, you got to kind of corral yourself and, find a niche that really fascinates you and then attack that hard rather than trying to understand the whole kabang, because
Right.
there's just too much.
Well, and I think that's really good advice to be very, kind of focal on something, and then your focus and what you might learn or bring to the table then becomes integrated, with the other professions and other disciplines and things into
And the other
projects,
thing, Chris,
experiments.
is you've brought it out well. You say you applied to be an astronaut. I applied again. Whatever your dream is, it's great to have those big dreams. And in order to get there, so you got to have that future goal. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking across the bay, a mile and a half across. I see a little house over there. That might be my goal. I want to be an astronaut someday. But along the way, you have those little in-between goals, accomplishable with real numbers to them and time frames to them. And you progress your way through those sub steps along the way. And if it doesn't, if you don't get to the other end there, I don't get across this bay here, a big wave knocks me off course. It's not so bad because I'm really set up for lots of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So have those minor for young people, have that big goal. Don't let anyone talk you out of it, and do concrete things to get yourself close to achieving that goal. And no matter what happens, whether you reach it or not, you're going to be close enough.
Yeah, I like that. That's great.
And lots of other opportunities along the way.
So, Jerry, I have to ask, what's next? What haven't you done that you want to do, or what in the world can be on an astronaut's bucket list? Is there such a thing as an astronaut's bucket list?
Yeah, I think there is. It's maybe not as concrete as it used to be, that goal of being an astronaut and all the steps it took to get there. But I love new learning curves. And so I'm always open to, the filming, for example, that we did here for One Strange Rock. I try to do extensive reading in areas that I'm not that familiar with. I think at one point you've prepared yourself to kind of have a broader perspective on things and to come at things from different angles because of the things that you may have accomplished in your life. And so I think no matter what the challenge is, you've got some tools that will help, even outside your field, outside medicine, outside space. I think you can, kind of use a different perspective and attack any problem from a different angle. So I don't have anything real concrete, I guess. My family's grown. I kind of launched them, if you will.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
so now I have a little bit of time to maybe start, doing something else. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to be.
I can't wait to watch and see. So, for people that we'll put it in the show notes for that want to tune into the show and learn more about you and things like that, what are the best ways for people to follow you or to reach out or whatnot?
Yeah, I'm actually not a big. I try to stay private, I guess.
Sure. Okay.
Kind of a funny thing. Astronauts in space, you're cut off. I just heard another astronaut. I won't mention who it was, but said that when she got back, she kind of wanted to avoid people a little bit, and it was like she had to overcome that because, you're sort of isolated and quiet, and you're able to. to think in your own thing. So
Right.
anyway, I've got Facebook and I've got a few of those things, but I'm not a big, tweet it out there all the time.
Gotcha.
You don't need to know what I'm eating for lunch, I
Yeah,
guess.
that's right. Yeah, exactly.
But I do go out. I do a lot of keynote speaking to corporate events and Renaissance weekends and all the other things. And so I'm out there. So you just have to dig a little bit.
All
I
right,
guess.
good. Yeah, I think because I was stalking you for a bit, so I think if people want, if people,
So you were able to find out quite a bit.
yeah, that was good.
So
So
it's out there.
yeah,
Yeah, I always tell you Google myself and oh my gosh, you got 1,000 hits. It's like so there's no end to it.
exactly.
Obviously, the books just went out of print actually, so they're getting harder to find. Maybe I'm just going to fade away into the sunset.
I
here.
seriously doubt that. So, but I know that if people do want to engage you for speaking and stuff, you're represented. So we'll try and get that.
Yeah, I'm with Washington Speakers Bureau.
Awesome.
And to me, it's the ultimate compliment when people appreciate what you're saying, appreciate what you did, and give me the opportunity to stand in front of their employees or their customers, and a couple thousand people out there, and I feel that that it matters, that I can influence lives, that I can bring a different perspective to the problems. And that's kind of one thing I do. When I do a talk, I study that company as much as I can. I probably know 100 times more than I need to know about it. But it's a little MBA course for me. It's the way I look at it. I think I have my MBA at this point from talking to different corporations and different associations and everything else, and it's been a wonderful sort of experience for me to have that privilege to get in front of those audiences.
Well, I think the privilege is probably quite shared, and I can't imagine, Jerry, with your background in history, that you would do anything without being quite prepared, because it has paid off in spades for you, my friend. So.
Well, as you know, Chris, it's a privilege to do the things that we are able to do. And I'll tell you, I hate wasting my time. You probably have sensed that from what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And I definitely hate wasting important people's time. Yeah. So you're right. I prepare hard. I try to make sure that I did not waste anyone's time, that we all get something out of it.
That's great. Well, I think I certainly feel like I have, and I think our audience will very much appreciate this time that you've spent with us today. It's just been a pleasure, and hopefully maybe we can reconnect at a Renaissance or cross paths someplace else again. I can look forward to seeing you again, Jerry. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Chris. And yeah, I hope we do, cross paths here on the planet Earth somewhere down the line. And it's an absolute privilege to be talking to you and to your listeners. So thank you.
Awesome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Living a Life in Full is a production of Stout Media, a subsidiary of Gordian Knot, LLC. Assistant producer, Gracie Wong. Music, Dan O'Brien. Post-production, Sam Rude. Graphics, Larry Newberry. Executive producer and host, Dr. Chris Stout. To learn more, stop by our website, alifeinfull.org, for show notes. And please recommend us to your friends and leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks.